Welcome back. I'm Ray Gibson from Art27. I'm joined by our panelists for a panel discussion to wrap up today's live stream. We're streaming on Facebook. If you do have questions, comments, things you'd like to know, write them in the chat, please, and we'll do our best to get to those. Just to say who we are, Art27 is a platform for artists, arts educators, and arts organisations working in Europe and beyond, sharing stories, cultural programmes, raising awareness of critical issues such as social inclusion. And we are very happy to be broadcasting today, September 21st, 2020, on World Peace Day, and supporting this day with our live streams, great projects and speakers over this 2-hour block. And our panel today is addressing expecting the unexpected. How can artists contribute to peace building? So we're joined by Laura Hassler from Musicians Without Borders, Jakob de Jonge, the Hague Peace Projects, Elisabetta Plebani from Free Press Unlimited, and Gail Babb, theatre maker and producer from Goldsmiths University of London. May I ask each of you, just so that our audience can get to know you a little bit better, can you please, I know this is criminal, but please try to introduce yourselves in about 1 minute, who you are and what you do. Laura, can I ask you first, please?
Thanks, Ray. Laura Hassler, I'm the director of Musicians Without Borders. Background in peace and civil rights movements in the United States and Europe, and I'm a musician. I'm also we're one of the founding members of Art27, which is trying to extend the reach and the contacts beyond only our own projects and our own work to connect with other people who are active for social change, social justice, and peace building around the world.
Perfect, thank you very much. And Jakob?
Yes, my name is Jakob de Jonge, and I'm the founder of the founding members, and also currently secretary of the board of the Hague Peace Project. This is an organization that works with the diaspora from all over the world living in the Netherlands who come from conflict areas. And besides that, relevant to the discussion, I'm also a visual artist. So I'm a painter.
Okay, very welcome. And Elisabetta, please.
Well, I'm a by profession a journalist. I've been sort of not working on the field for a number of years because now I feel that I myself more as solution sort of oriented journalist. So I work with colleagues from conflict areas, and we work on a dialogue and media development project with the idea of making, let's say, their work surviving, but also try to tackle the root causes and try to work around that to create cohesion and to build peace in those conflict contexts.
Okay, very good, thank you. And finally, please, Gail, if you could introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm a theatre maker, and I make theatre with professionals, but also with people that might not call themselves artists. So children and young people, mental health service users, including refugees. A lot of my work is centred around Black Britishness and around racial justice. And I also teach at Goldsmiths University.
Perfect, thank you all. So to frame our discussion, Art27 describes itself as a platform for artists and arts organisations dedicated to social inclusion. While Art27 currently embraces all initiatives for social inclusion, we established our network in the context of the refugee crisis and Europe's failure to respond to the situation of very desperate people seeking safety from war, climate crisis, abject poverty. We have some key statements. It's not a refugee crisis, it's a war crisis. Refugee is an experience, not an identity, and access to culture is a fundamental human right. So we hope to address some of the big questions with this panel today of very experienced people. So our first question is where we are really at right now. How many refugees are there? Where have they come from, over what period, and how are they being cared for? Laura, may I ask you, can you give us some insight to the scope and scale of what we're dealing with, please?
Well, I'm not an expert on this, but I do try to mention it when I speak about the arts and working for social change, social inclusion, because I think it's very important, and I think it's very important in Europe and beyond. So I did look it up. I look it up every time I do something, and every time I speak, it seems like the numbers have gone up again. According to UNHCR, the most recent numbers for the number of displaced people around the world are at least 79.5 million. It's the highest number since the Second World War. Of those, something like 46 million are internally displaced people, and 26 million are refugees, so outside of the region that they come from. And something like 85% of those people are actually in the regions that they've fled. So the whole sort of media idea that most refugees are flooding into Europe is totally wrong. And maybe to connect to that, another figure, which I also looked up today and has also gone up since the last time I used it in a conversation, is the amount of military expenditure in the world in also the same year, 2019, last year, which is, I have to look at the number because I can't remember it, it's too big, $1,917 billion US, the largest annual increase in a decade. And I looked this up because of the connection between these two. So we're talking about, I mean, refugees, people have always moved around the world. There have always been migrants, there have always been refugees, there have always been situations when people had to leave and escape wherever they were because life was unbearable or because threats were too great. But the enormity of this problem, I think, goes exactly parallel with the enormity of the domination of war and armed conflict in our world.
Right, so we've got figures there, 79.5 million displaced people, which is pretty much, I think, the population of Germany, to put it in perspective, right? I think there's about 80 million people in Germany. And you say 85% of those, many of them are still in the regions which they fled. So they're still in a conflict area, is that right, Laura? They're still facing...
either in a conflict area or in a nearby country, and very often in these dismal, enormous refugee camps that finally turn into kind of slums or cities where people never have any hope of leaving.
Yeah, or burn down and build one on the road, which is recently happening, of course, here in Norway, yes. Right. Okay, thank you, Laura. That's stunning statistics.
Sorry to start with this grim.
No, it's. I think people can look at, Pop Idol or anything they want tomorrow, but today is about talking about serious issues. So it's good to have the data. And Jakob, may I ask you your thoughts on what the root causes of a lot of this migration actually are? Why do people get up and move? Laura's mentioned that this has always been happening, but not at this scale, obviously. So what's driving this exponential growth in necessary migration, do you think? Yeah, you may be on mute, Jakob, sorry. I just asked you to start again.
Excuse me, yeah. I was just about to say that I recently spoke to a Sudanese activist who very briefly summarized it for me, saying that most people from Africa, at least, come for the reason of either war, dictatorship, or poverty, or a combination of the three. Because if you talk, for instance, about the country of Sudan, all three happen to be the case at the same time: dictatorships, creating wars, creating poverty, and etc. But then again, you have to add to that what is poverty, what does it cause, and what causes these dictatorships. And I think then very quickly we have to look at the differences, the inequality that exists in a global on a global scale, especially between the Western countries and the non-Western countries, and continuous policy of sort of keeping it also that way. So using the global South as an area of exploitation rather than a real ally to move these countries beyond the line of poverty. And of course, the the big, generally, if you talk about war, then I would say there's this big global, the big states, America, Russia, and China, creating also or at least fomenting, stimulating one of the other parties in smaller wars. You can talk very long about all these things in general, but just to give a very basic overview, I think this will say something about it.
No, I think that's great. And I think it's really important to highlight these root causes, because otherwise we only deal with the immediate crisis and then move on to whatever else is in the news next week. And then the same root causes carry on and carry on and carry on. So this is exactly why we're here today, to bring these to the table. Would anybody else like to share more on what people think the root causes are, or give more examples? Maybe Gail or Elisabetta?
I don't know. I mean, in the situation of some conflicts like Syria, for example, as Jakob said, I mean, the oppression has been there for many years, and not giving the opportunities of developing in any ways, and to probably have alternatives in how to lead their lives. And when this conflict came, which was for many who initiated that, meant to bring some change in a peaceful way, and then it transformed into this conflict, there was very much unpreparedness. I mean, people were really not expecting, not the volume and not the depth of this conflict, and at a certain point it became really desperate, and people also left because, for example, they were refusing to go to work, because they were refusing to have their children going to work and enrolled in something that they never choose from the first place. It's also desperation because those people that left were those that maybe had the means, and those who remains not necessarily wanted to remain, but they didn't. So we're talking about, for Syria, they talk about 13 million displaced people internally and in the region. So it's the reason why they live at a certain point, it's a survival from all this combination of problems. It's to bring their children to save. Some families left their children go by themselves because they think you make a better chance if you go.
Okay, Gail, anything to add to these root causes?
Not really, other than just to say it's to sort of echo what Elisabetta was saying around desperation and survival, that nobody would make this journey for a laugh or a joke, or just for small things, that these are people who are fleeing for the basic human rights that we've agreed apparently across the world that we all deserve, and to be able to thrive as well as survive. And we're in a situation where many people are just fighting to survive.
And so these three drivers that Jakob mentioned of war, dictatorship, or poverty, which are obviously intrinsically linked, are driving people away. The people that can afford to move, not everybody. Laura, you'd like to add something, I think?
But just also to add that an element in this whole story, I think, that is increasing and is going to play an increasing role in the very near future is climate change. Because people are also fleeing from, places where nothing will grow anymore, or from climate disaster, or from conflicts which are either caused or exacerbated by climate breakdown. Yeah,
which is also accelerating. I believe there are some events on this coming Friday. I think there are a lot of demonstrations for climate change as well coming up, so we'll hear a lot more about that. Okay, and Gail, coming back to you as a theatre maker and performer, so we're all here as artists, right, today. What role do you think artists can play in addressing these root causes, first of all? This is a huge question. I'm sorry to land that on you.
Not at all. I mean, I think it's the fact that the root causes are huge. So if we're looking at war, oppression, and poverty, when you look at them as a whole, I think there's very little that an artist can do but be daunted by the prospect of starting to tackle any of them. But I think what artists do well and what we can't help but doing is galvanize people. We can create areas of focus that people can gather around. We can create discussion and debate. We can create critical thought in individuals, in groups, and eventually sort of contributing to movements, allowing people to see the world differently and to take action based on the world that they then see. So we can encourage people to work in partnership with other organizations, schools, education, with local government, and to try and lobby for the change that needs to happen. I think the other thing we can do is imagine, because we're talking about really fundamental structural change globally that needs to happen to address any one of those issues, plus climate change. And I think people get really stuck in not being able to see the route to something different, because everything is so embedded and we've all sort of been taught in certain ways and given certain frames. And what we can do is imagine the world differently, ask those big questions, go what if, in a way that I think very few other people can.
Thank you, Gail. Jakob, coming back to you, do we stand a chance with this? Can we change the world through art and music and dance and pictures? These are big issues.
These are very big issues indeed, and yeah, it's a big question that I almost daily ask myself. You know, as an artist especially. Like I totally agree with Gail that imagination is one of the big powers of art. You know, one of the things that I usually always say that, you know, a lot of times, especially if you just are just an ordinary citizen reading the news, then, you know, making up your mind and concluding after you've read all about the bomb attacks or the corona crisis, etc., you might conclude, you know, it's never going to be anything, you know. So you know, imagination is where it all starts. I fully agree with that. Only when we sort of allow ourselves to believe in certain concepts of then that automatically creates a space for the possibility for them to be realized. For instance, I always give the example of world peace. You know, nowadays, if you say world peace, you know, it's, you know, if you start talking about that, everyone starts to laugh because it's so far away from reality, world peace. You know, but as long as you do that and you only look cynically, then you've lost already. So it's almost a task of all of us to really take the concept and just start believing that it's possible and imagine how that would look like. And that's already a very great step, because then people start believing in it. And that when there's no one believing in the concept of world peace, there will never be world peace. But when you start to believe that it's possible, that's already the first step. So that's one thing. The second thing I would say is also, in my experience, it's very important for us artists to relate concretely with true victims of certain of the situation as it is now. So I've seen too much art, visual art, which is sort of conceptually all right and perfect and well thought through, but then you know, you see it in a wide space somewhere in a gallery of New York or Tokyo or whatever. And what is that going to do? So I think a lot of the art it depends a lot on which corner of art you are, but a big part of the art is sort of too much sort of isolated. And I think we, as artists, we need to break out of a sort of isolation and really connect on a personal level with victims and witnesses and activists very personally, and sort of take in these stories and make them your own, and try to move out of your own sort of ivory tower, let's say.
Okay, and just taking a step back, if we think back to, I think probably the early 1970s, and we've used the word imagine several times. We had John Lennon and Yoko advertising for peace, didn't we? And we had, you know, war is over if you want it. And
it's a good example.
Fantastic campaign, right? Almost 50 years ago. Why do we think we're still here? Why do you think that these root causes still persist over the decades? Why did those themes and ideas, which are great and still valid, why did they not break through and become the mainstream and the main opinion, do you think? Anybody?
I can say something about it, but I don't want to sort of claim the whole discussion. Just I will say one thing, and that is I think that the system has not changed. You know, so people have moved. Like even the demonstrators of the 60s and 70s, they have moved along the food chain and have now become the leaders, but of the leaders of the same system, basically. So the system which is based on exploitation of other people, that's what we are part of, and it's hard to see that if you're on the good side, because then you're profiting from that system. But basically, the system has not changed.
Okay.
Well, may reflect on this. The work that, for example, we do with building this media building and peace building program. It comes also from why so many years of working together with other countries, investing in the work there has not changed that much. And why these people are actually always saying, okay, this is the oppressor, this is the problem. So we are talking about what can you do now at the grassroots level? What can the citizen now do? Because you cannot expect that international organization, you cannot expect that, let's say, the peace building system of the UN, for example, I don't know how many years it's old, probably 60 years or more, has not worked. Maybe it's not the system itself, the mechanism in itself. So we have to go back to the citizens. I mean, to solve their local or their whatever environment that they're working on, if they want to change anything, and becoming more active and more participating in their conditions, it might bring more a little bit of change. But it is true that this system is so dominant, is so present. You see also now in the pandemic of COVID. I mean, we have a great occasion, I think, to change, to flip certain things. But as soon as the sort of the crisis went down, there was some kind of again tendency to go back to the normal system. It has to be from 9 to 5. It has to be a certain salary at the end of the day. It has to be a certain system that we have supported. So it is very, very hard to change it, but it is possible if you really work from the close reality of the people on the ground.
Okay, and so picking up on what Jakob said, that there were people, you know, of that movement in the 60s and 70s that grew up and became the generation that joined the system, if you like. Are we doomed for this to be a recurring cycle and for generation after generation to have grand ideals but then give in? Or how do we break that?
Could I say something to that?
Please, yeah.
Not all of us did join the system.
Okay.
I mean, and I was talking with Gail the other day about something different, and she said, you know, when Angela Davis says that this period gives her hope, I'm willing to believe it. Angela Davis said, I never thought I would see this amount of public action. And I agree very much with Elisabetta that the only way that change happens is from the bottom up, when people demand it. And that we are working in a very, I agree with Jakob also that the system did not change. But I also don't agree that nothing happened in that period, because a lot of things did happen. A lot of change happened, but the movements ran out of steam at some point. Well, also, you know, the heads of those movements very often were assassinated. So we lost leadership. And, but, you know, I heard a very interesting, I was listening to an interview with Noam Chomsky the other day, and he was asked who had given him hope. And he quoted Howard Zinn, the great historian, who said, all of those unnamed ordinary people who have been participating in all of those struggles all of those years, who have made great events possible later on. And I think, you know, if you look at it from that perspective, we are standing on strong shoulders. And the fact that the powerful of the world have control of a lot of what gets out there, a lot of the media, but they don't have it all. And there are more activists, and there are more organizations, and there are more people out there, I think, than ever before. And it's just that it's not as visible as the rest, so we tend to forget it. And the propaganda is so strong. but it is there and we are building on it. And just to also add to this, I mean, what I think, in addition to what both Gail and Jakob said about what the arts can do, that I think is so important now, two big things that commercialized arts have kind of lost, but I think is to me the core of what the arts, what culture is about, is in the first place connecting people to each other through participating in things with each other, through being part of a process, through creating. And the second thing is holding up that mirror to society and being a critical voice. And maybe with both of those things, one of the results of those is to diminish the power of fear. And fear is, of course, the great weapon that gets used to keep us all in our places or to keep people in their places. And I think those three things are very powerful things that the arts can now do in this period where, yeah, I agree that you hear a lot of people saying, oh, let's go back to what was normal. I don't think that's going to happen. I think something else is going to emerge, and we have the possibility of playing a role in what that something is. And I think this is a real moment when if artists step up and work together, we have a chance of creating something better.
Can I add something to that, Ray?
Go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, I think if we talk about imagination and the role of and connection also, I think one of the causes of sort of this, Laura called it sort of a lost scene or something. Of course, what for almost 200 years bound the downtrodden together was some sort of idea, sort of a belief in this idea of communism. Huh? So for a long time, this has given inspiration to the belief that there was an alternative to this capitalist system in which everyone has its place as either a ruler or a servant, the leaders and the oppressed. So there was for a long time, as long as communism had something good to show in the world, there was some hope everywhere that we could change this oppressive system into something that would be sort of different and where people are more equal, etc. And of course, I think the end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s, with all the disillusions that came about Eastern Europe and Eastern Germany and the fall of the Soviet Empire, etc. And all of the crimes that came about, that this was, it was truly horrible. And besides that, it was truly horrible, it also was the perfect tool for those that wanted to sort of dismiss all sort of social movement by telling everybody that communism or every belief in an idea that there was an alternative in capitalism was equal to genocide somehow. And sort of, I think that has taken root, especially in the 90s and up to now, that I see among my peers, people who believe and have a good heart, good hope, etc. That still they see no alternative to the current system. They always say, yeah, it's horrible, but this is the best of the worst, let's say. And I think so. Concluding to that, I think it would be very good if artists could work to some sort of common narrative of hope and belief, because then that has to do with imagination, with connection. If there's a narrative that yes, there is an alternative to whatever is present now, that will reignite and re-energize a lot of feelings of hope that things can change.
Totally agree. Okay.
Well, you remind me of what now maybe it's not become a very fashionable word, but it was a solidarity. That sense of caring, for not only where you are, but also with the reality and the conditions of people, young, of old, women or men, that we're going through. And that's, I think, something that probably is there, but it has been silenced for a long time. So definitely there is a room to go back without being trapped in that some kind of polarized political narrative, which I think has demotivated many. But in principle, when you look at how many of us have this energy and this sort of passion and interest to work in a certain direction, is because that is a sense of you know that you are part of a whole, and you don't find fair that certain things happen in a certain way. And when it comes to artist and sort of this idea of a solution and so on, I see so much actually a positive influence of creativity and examples taken from the artists in general, from architects, from musicians, from theater makers, from into the work of what we do, for example, development or sort of development of projects, innovation, all these things, they're very much included. And this kind of linking, this concept of linking is very much present today. I think is as I say, it's a strong development, I would say. We would not I didn't see that like so many years ago. Mm-hmm. So
very good. And we've touched on the global pandemic and COVID-19, which is obviously influencing everything right now. If we think about this as artists and arts organizations, how is this a portal of change for us, and how is it impacting the arts specifically? The impact that we can have on these root causes, and also the impact it has on our ability to counteract negative events, for example. For anyone, if anybody wants to comment on that. Gail, maybe, yeah.
I think the key thing for me is that the pandemic has created a rupture, like it's put a crack down right the way through down the arts industry, but through every industry through the world globally. And there's something that the crack creates a space for us to do something. The world has to change. We have no choice. It's forced us. And I think that my hope is that we're really deliberate about the change that we make, whether that's in an arts industry, whether that's in peace building, across all of the board, is that we need to ask ourselves what it is we're going to let go, what can fall down that crack and never come back up, what we're going to hold on to, what new disruptive ways of working, what ideas that we've never thought before are we going to allow the space to really to lead us. So yeah, I think the positive, it's hard to find one, but the positive from the pandemic is that it smashed right through.
Right. Okay, anyone else?
Well, I believe that at least artists played a role in making us survive that disruption. I think that they really contributed in alleviating, in enjoying, in sharing, in feeling near while we are so far. So in that sense, I think it has been an eye-opener for many, especially those that maybe never thought of. And so I would say, is it not so that arts and literature and was always the most effective when there are problems? I mean, in front of a pandemic like this, you have seen how much potential is there of finding solution alternatives and way out and not giving up. I'm not saying that it's always easy, but definitely has helped.
Laura, can we come to you?
Sure. I obviously important things have just been said by both. I think also that arts can give people a way to express grief and loss, because there is a lot to grieve about. There will probably be a lot more. And I think, going back to what Gail said earlier on the capacity to imagine something different. I think there's also a quality of fearlessness obviously not in every artist, but that is part of being an artist, is fearlessness. And I think that fearlessness is going to be something we're going to need. I also think that who knows? But who knows anything right now? And I think it's all right not to know the answers yet. And I think that's also something that creative people can live with. I was in a discussion before this and had been asked to start by describing some recent experience that I'd had as a musician. I thought about it. I thought, yeah, the truth is, I haven't made music since the beginning of this pandemic. That's my most recent experience as a musician. And I think part of the reason is that I have this feeling that it's for me anyway, it's a time more of listening than of making sound, because it sort of in the larger sense, because I think something needs to emerge. We will have a role. We might not know what that is yet, and that's a very big we, so different people will understand what they're called to do at different times. But it feels to me like this is a time where a lot is being revealed, that and you know, as Gail said, things must change. The return to the old system is the worst thing that could happen, but also a worse system could come out of this, and we don't know. But I think that, you know, there's something about, you know, holding on to the feelings of now, summoning that fearlessness that we can find within our arts, sticking with others and connecting with people who are maybe not in the arts community, but who can be allies. And that, I think that's the next challenge for social change moving forward, is making those connections. And, you know, everybody will have a role, but, you know, to understand that we do have a role, and it's an important one. And we can also play that role for, you know, as Elisabetta said, you know, to give people comfort, to cheer people, to help people through, to, you know, also to help each other through. But there's a very particular thing about culture and creativity and artistry that I think might also be rediscovered by us collectively in this period.
Wonderful, yeah. Okay.
I cannot as an artist, but I would also say it's not fair to give so much responsibility to the artist only. We really have to share a little bit more of responsibility. And if the artists have this special extra gear to feel and so on, but definitely it's not only related to them. So I think that we also have to make sure that more people are joining.
Okay, well, as thought leaders on our panel today, I'd like to ask you to gather your thoughts, please, and if you could try to come up with a closing statement that you think would be empowering to our audience at a time like this, revealing all of these root causes of disruption, migration, war, poverty, oppression, everything that we've spoken about in the lens of the pandemic. And all of the struggles that people are going through day to day, people, you know, losing their jobs, looking for new opportunities, being displaced, losing loved ones, living in fear. So what can people do at a time like this, whether they are artists or consumers of culture? Doesn't matter, whoever they are. Can I ask each of you to think, you know, what would be your advice that people can do or think or feel at a time like this, please? I don't mind who starts or who finishes, but those would be our closing statements, please. You're brave, go ahead.
Well, I don't know, it resounds to me in something, we should not be indifferent. It's always about asking yourself what it's all about, and what kind of society and conditions we want for ourselves and we grant to others. If that question is alive in us, it's something that I would really wish our society have constantly in their mind every day. What is all about?
Okay, thank you very much.
I would say keep feeling and connecting. I think I'm struck by Laura said about an artist's role diminishing fear, and I think it was Elisabetta that also talked about hope. And so I'm thinking about make art and consume art, or do whatever you need to do to keep yourself feeling and to keep checking in on what those emotions are telling you about how you want to sit with the world and what you want to do for others. Because I think the other thing that we might have forgotten in the thing that art can do is provide space for anger. And I think that sometimes we're afraid of anger. Sometimes we're told that it's a negative thing, and, you know, we don't want the anger that's going to hurt other people, but anger is a motivating force. And so if you can, yeah, engage in art, keep feeling, and keep going where your emotions tell you to. I think that was a good step forward.
Thank you, Gail.
Yeah, if I may say something, just one thing that Laura said was that struck me was that this might be a portal for change, but it could also be the wrong change. As an example, I would say the big demonstrations anti-corona. These movements are filled with ignorance and a totally twisted view of the world, and these are fueled by right-wing groups. I would say we have to also be very alert to that side. And basically, what I want to say also as a message to close is, first of all, inform yourself about what's going on. Don't be afraid of the truth, because don't be afraid of the horror. There's a lot of horror in the world, and you shouldn't be afraid to look away. You shouldn't look away, and at the same time try not to be overwhelmed by it, and not say that this is the world. So the next step after you dare to look the horror in the face, I would say, is connect with other people and talk about it, and try to find also connect with true victims and see what hope they have. And if what I always found itself to be, that real victims of horrible crimes of states, they do have hope still. So what rights do we have, and as well established people in the West, to be desperate, So what right do we have to not to be hopeful? So try to inform yourself and try to connect and try to learn what you can do from the real activists.
Thank you, Jakob. Okay, Laura, from you, please, and your last, no pressure.
Cool. I would add to what everybody else said, to acknowledge grief, to try to deal with it as from our own abilities and perspectives, because that is there and that will be there, and that is related to the suffering, and it's related to the loss, and it's related to the fear that there is. I saw a beautiful song by Janelle Monáe called Turning Tables, I think it's called. And she starts with the voice of James Baldwin. And you hear him saying, I'm not a pessimist. How could I be a pessimist? Because I'm alive. And to me, this is, being alive, being in the moment, whatever is going around about you, and finding ways of embracing, I would say, radical uncertainty, and working with it, because that's the world we're in, I think, at this point.
Okay, thank you, Laura. And this concludes our panel discussion today on World Peace Day, September 21st, 2020. Thanks so much to our panelists for dialing in late in the evening in Europe, and much appreciate your time and your ideas and your inspiration for all of us listening, including me. And this is Art27 signing off. You can find us at art27.art. We'll be back for another live stream on the 5th of October for World Teachers Day, and we hope to bring you some great conversation there too. Thanks again for dialing in, and see you all soon.
Thanks everybody.